David Sullivan adjusted the buttons of his suit as he looked around the upscale coffee shop. It was supposed to be a festive day, the day he and his best friend Ryan were about to close one of the biggest deals of their lives, a deal that would cement their company's position as an industry leader and ensure financial success for years to come. The coffee shop was bustling with soft conversation, the clink of cutlery, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee. Everything seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. "Ryan, I'm going to go to the bathroom," David said as he stood up from the rustic, polished wooden table. Ryan, who was scrolling through his phone, barely looked up, just nodded absent-mindedly. David walked away, a sense of pride spreading through him. Years of hard work had led him to this moment, building an empire with Ryan, and together they were about to close a deal that would take them to new heights. In David's absence, the atmosphere at the table had changed. Emily, a young waitress who had been working at the bar for a few months, approached to refill Ryan's glass. Normally she kept quiet, not intruding on the conversations of the wealthy patrons who frequented the place. However, today was different, and as she approached the table, she overheard a conversation that made her stop. Ryan, thinking no one was paying attention, was talking quietly into his phone. His words sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Everything is ready. David has no idea. When the deal is done, I will control everything. When he realizes what is happening, it will be too late. I have been planning this for months. The company, the assets, it will all be mine." Emily's hands trembled slightly, almost spilling her drink, as she quickly backed away. Her heart pounded in her chest, unable to believe her ears. Ryan, the man David considered his best friend and business partner, was planning to betray and take everything they had built together. She quickly retreated to the kitchen, trying to process what she had just heard. She had no personal stake in this, she was just a waitress after all. But something in her mind urged her to act. Could she just stand by and pretend she hadn't heard? A moment later, David returned to the table, completely oblivious to the betrayal that had taken place in his absence. Ryan greeted him with a smile that hid his true intentions. Emily watched from a distance, her mind racing. She had always been a reserved person, but this was different. She couldn't just stand by and watch an innocent man be destroyed by his best friend. Mustering up all her courage, Emily decided to act. When Ryan excused himself to make a phone call, Emily saw her chance. Taking a deep breath, she approached David's table with the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice barely audible. David was surprised when the waitress approached him directly. "Yes, Emily," he hesitated, her pulse quickening but unable to turn around. "I just heard something you need to know," she said, glancing nervously toward the door where Ryan had just emerged. David frowned, not understanding what she meant. "What do you mean?" Emily took a deep breath. "Your friend Ryan, I think he's planning to betray you. I heard him on the phone saying he's going to take everything from you when this deal is done." David blinked, taken aback by her words. His instinct was to deny it. This was Ryan, his best friend, someone he'd trusted for years. Why would she suggest that? I'm sorry," David asked, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. His voice was thick with confusion and disbelief. "I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I'm telling the truth," Emily continued, her voice becoming more urgent. "I heard him say it himself. He's planning to take control of the company and leave you with nothing. If this deal goes through, it will all be his." David's initial shock began to fade into doubt. Could this be true? Could the person he had trusted for so long be planning to betray him? He glanced toward the door where Ryan was still on the phone, doubt creeping into his mind, eroding the trust he had always had in his best friend. "Are you sure about this?" David asked in a more serious tone. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I wouldn't tell you if I wasn't. I just can't let you sign this deal without knowing what I've heard." David sat back, his mind racing. He had known Ryan since childhood. They had built the company together from the ground up. The thought that Ryan would betray him was almost unbelievable, but the sincerity in the way Emily spoke made him had to stop. She wasn't the person he thought would lie about this. "Thank you," David said finally, his voice softer. Emily nodded and quickly retreated, leaving David alone with his chaotic thoughts. The once certain moment of celebration now felt fragile, on the brink of collapse. David looked at the contract on the table, his mind in turmoil. If what Emily said was true, then signing this agreement could be the biggest mistake of his life. He had to be sure, had to find out the truth. When Ryan returned to the cafe smiling as if nothing had happened, David knew one thing for sure: he couldn't trust anyone, not even his best friend, without knowing the whole truth. David sat back, his mind reeling with doubt and confusion. He watched Ryan approach with a smile, as if the world was at peace beneath his feet. Emily's words echoed in his head: he's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing. Unable to reconcile this accusation with the man he had just met, David felt as if everything had changed. "Is everything okay, Ryan?" he asked casually, while inside there was a storm of chaos. Ryan asked casually. "Everything's fine. Everything's fine, you know?" He chuckled softly and sat back down. David forced a smile, despite the uneasy, uncertain feeling in his stomach. "Yeah, just thinking about the deal, you know." His voice was forced to be calm. Ryan nodded and took a sip of water. "I understand. Big decisions like this, but we've been working on this for years. It's time to make it official." David nodded, still looking down at the papers in front of him. They had spent years building this business, and now they were on the verge of expanding even further. But the words of a waitress, someone he had never known before, had thrown everything into chaos today. Was Ryan really capable of such a betrayal? The thought ate at him, making him question: had Emily misheard or misunderstood something? "I think I need a little more time," David said slowly, his eyes still glued to the contract. Ryan frowned slightly. "More time?" David sighed. "Yes, I need to make sure everything is in order." His voice was both calm and determined. Ryan smiled, but the smile was no longer genuine. "Of course," he said, his tone still friendly. "But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come along often." David nodded, his decision made. He wouldn't sign anything until he had more information. "I'll let you know soon," he said as he stood up to leave. Ryan was still sitting there, the smile still there, but David couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had changed. There was a tension, a nuance in Ryan's words that hadn't been there before. David left the cafe, his mind filled with doubt, disbelief, and worry. He didn't want to believe that his best friend could betray him, but now everything was changed forever. David also knew he couldn't be naive in this situation. Much was at stake. When he stepped outside, the cool evening air filled the air. Emily was waiting near the entrance with a worried look on her face. She looked up as David approached, biting her lip nervously. "Have you talked to him?" she asked in a low, concerned voice. David paused, not wanting to reveal too much right away. "I haven't signed anything," he replied, but added, "But I need to find out more." Emily nodded, a look of relief on her face. "I was so nervous, I didn't know if you would trust me." David looked at her for a moment before asking, "Why did you talk to me?" Emily hesitated, looking down at her shoes for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "I know I'm just a waitress, but when I heard what he said, I couldn't let you go on without warning you. It wasn't right." Emily's honesty convinced David. She had nothing to lose by revealing this information, but she was taking the risk. David realized she was genuinely worried about him, which only made him more confused. "I really do. I appreciate it. I think I saved you from making a big mistake." Emily shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to the attention. "I'm just glad I could help." David nodded, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He knew he needed more than a warning to act. He needed proof. "I'll hire someone to look into it further," he said, more to himself than to Emily. "I can't make any decisions until I'm sure." Emily looked relieved to see that he was serious. "That's probably wise. I just hope it's not true to you." David smiled wryly, "Me too." As he walked away, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was someone he knew who could help him with the investigation: Julian, a private investigator he had used before for business matters. He dialed the number and waited. "Julian, this is David Sullivan. I have a situation and I need your help." Over the next few minutes, David explained his conversation with Emily and his growing concerns about Ryan. Julian listened carefully, asked a few specific questions, and then agreed to begin looking into Ryan's finances immediately. "I'll see what I find," Julian said. "Give me a few days." David hung up, feeling both relieved and anxious. He had taken the first step toward discovering the truth, but now came the hard part: waiting. Back in his car, he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting Ryan to emerge from the cafe and confront him, but the doors remained closed and the streets were quiet. For the next few days, David lived in a state of uneasy anticipation. Every encounter with Ryan seemed to be filled with metaphorical meaning, as if every word his best friend said might be part of the plan Emily had warned him about. However, Ryan, with his charming and confident exterior, gave no hint of deception. If he was plotting something behind David's back, he did a good job of hiding it. Meanwhile, Julian was digging into Ryan's financial records. David had only trusted Julian with delicate business matters a few times before, but this time his thoroughness was of the utmost importance. As the days passed, David tried to maintain his routine as if nothing had changed, meeting Ryan for regular business discussions, attending board meetings, and even going out for drinks with him to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Inwardly, he constantly observed Ryan, looking for any sign of error, any clue that would confirm Emily's warnings. But Ryan was still the same friendly, confident friend as before, which only made David more confused. On the third day, Julian called. "Have you found anything?" David asked as soon as he heard Julian's name on the screen. Julian answered, his voice steady but serious. "Not much, but it's a start. There were some irregularities in Ryan's personal accounts, some unexplained transfers in the last few months. He's been moving money into an offshore account. It's not illegal, but the timing is interesting. Right around the time you two started negotiating a new deal." David's stomach clenched. "How much are you talking about?" "Not a lot, but enough to make me suspicious," Julian continued. "I'm still looking for more details, but he's clearly got something up his sleeve." David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Do you think it has something to do with what Emily heard?" Julian replied, "Maybe. People don't just move money around like that for no reason. Especially foreign currency, it's usually to hide something or prepare for a big move. I think he's planning on making a big move once this deal is done." David closed his eyes for a moment, a heavy feeling weighing on his mind. Emily was right, Ryan was up to something, and if Julian's suspicions were correct, it was worse than he'd imagined. "Keep digging," he said. "I need more concrete evidence." Julian agreed. "I'll keep you posted." David put the phone down and looked out the large office window, the view of the city skyline doing nothing to calm his troubled thoughts. How had it come to this? Ryan had been there for him through the ups and downs of building the business. They'd celebrated successes together and grieved failures together. Yet now Ryan seemed to have been secretly plotting his betrayal for months, quietly moving money in preparation for a takeover. Anger began to simmer inside David. He'd trusted Ryan with everything they'd built together. The thought of Ryan betraying him for a bigger reward was beyond belief. His anger boiled over as he thought about what Ryan had said at the coffee shop, the casual confidence in his voice as he plotted to take everything from David. Since when has Ryan felt this way? Has he always been jealous of your success? Or has he simply been plotting to take you down while pretending to be your best friend? That evening, David met Ryan for dinner. It was a regular routine for them, a chance to discuss business in a more relaxed setting. But tonight, David's heart pounded with the weight of what he knew. When he arrived, Ryan was already seated. He greeted David with his usual easy smile, but as David sat down across from him, he couldn't help but see Ryan in a different light. This wasn't just his best friend anymore, but someone who had plotted to take everything they had built. They exchanged greetings, talked about the day's meetings, and discussed a few potential business opportunities. Ryan, as usual, was charming and persuasive, talking about their future as if nothing had changed. "So what's the progress on the deal?" Ryan asked calmly between bites of steak. David paused, watching Ryan carefully before answering. "I'm still looking into a few things," he said calmly. "I want to make sure everything's in order before we finalize." Something flashed in Ryan's eyes, whether it was impatience or irritation, David couldn't be sure. But then the smile returned easily. "Of course, Ryan, there's no rush. I just don't want us to miss this opportunity." David nodded, his expression expressionless, but inside he was seething with anger. How could Ryan sit there pretending everything was fine when he knew his plan? The dinner passed uneventfully, but David's resolve only grew stronger. He couldn't face Ryan right now, not until Julian had more concrete evidence. But deep down, he knew the friendship he had once cherished was over. There was no going back. That night, David lay in bed, unable to sleep. He thought about Emily. Her warning had saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. But now, he had to find a way to protect what was his without giving himself away too soon. Ryan was playing a dangerous game, and David needed to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, David woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest that had not lessened since his last dinner with Ryan. He replayed every detail in his mind, the smiles, the reassurances, the subtle impatience. How long had Ryan been planning this? David found it difficult to focus on anything else as his mind filled with thoughts of the man who had once been his closest ally and now had undoubtedly become his greatest enemy. By midday, David received a call from Julian. His heart rate increased as he picked up the phone, hoping for some clarity to overcome the terror he was feeling. David tried to keep his voice calm. "I've uncovered more information," Julian began. "I think we're seeing the big picture." Julian's voice was tentative but carried a weight of urgency. David sat up straighter in his chair. "What did you find?" "There's been a pattern of transactions over the past year. Money has been moving out of the company in small, careful batches, just below the threshold that would trigger internal alerts. Ryan has apparently been moving these funds into personal offshore accounts. He's withdrawn more than you'd think." David's stomach twisted. "How much are we talking about?" "Somewhere close to $5 million, all hidden away in hard-to-trace accounts. If it wasn't caught early, it would be hard to track. He's been preparing for this for a long time," Julian answered bluntly. David felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. $5 million? This isn't just a betrayal of money, it's the scale of Ryan's plan. He didn't just take advantage of an opportunity, he's been carefully orchestrating this collapse all this time. Julian continued, "I also found some communications that suggest Ryan has been in contact with some of your business rivals. It seems like he's preparing a big move, possibly to take control of the company when this deal is done. If you've signed those papers, you've handed everything over to him." David's blood ran cold. All the signs were there, but he'd ignored them, blindly trusting history. Ryan had been positioning himself for months, building his network, moving funds, and laying the groundwork for a full-scale takeover, and David had been oblivious. "David, you need to act fast," Julian said in a hard voice. "This isn't just a few bad decisions, it's calculated fraud. If you don't stop him now, he'll carry out his plan." David gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "What should we do?" "Anyway, I've gathered enough evidence to freeze the accounts he's using. Then confront him strategically. Don't reveal anything to him until you're ready to press charges," Julian replied calmly and professionally. David nodded, his mind already filled with ideas. "I'll contact the legal team right away to make sure the company is protected before confronting him." "Okay," Julian replied. "I'll send you all the documents I've gathered. You'll have everything you need to make a legal case." After the call ended, David sat back and stared at the ceiling for a moment. It was all too much to process. Ryan, the money, the betrayal, a year of careful fraud. All the while, David had trusted him completely. Anger was building up, threatening to explode, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. He had to be smart about this. Ryan was not just a friend turned traitor, but a formidable opponent who was playing the long game. David immediately called his legal team, presenting everything Julian had discovered. His lawyers quickly set to work drafting the necessary documents to freeze the accounts and prevent Ryan from accessing company funds. David felt a wave of relief knowing that, at least for the moment, he could prevent Ryan from doing more damage. However, that relief was short-lived. The next step was to confront Ryan directly, and David knew that this would not be easy. That evening, David arranged to meet Ryan in a private office space they often used for confidential discussions. The setting felt appropriate for what was about to happen: neutral, professional, and out of sight. Ryan arrived on time, greeting David with a pleasant smile that now turned malevolent. "Hey David," Ryan said with a bright smile as he walked in. "I've been thinking about the deal. We're almost done." David tried to keep his composure, holding out his hand for Ryan to sit. "Sit down. We need to talk." Ryan's smile faltered a bit as he sat down across from David, sensing the change in the atmosphere. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" David stared at him for a long moment, the weight of their history colliding with the present reality. "I know everything, Ryan." Ryan was shocked, but quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a small, insincere smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, David. Maybe you're imagining things." "A private investigator has verified every transaction, every exchange. You planned this for over a year," David replied in a steady but angry voice. The tension in the room was heavy. Ryan tried to maintain a confident expression, but the truth began to surface. "You're exaggerating the situation. What you saw were just normal transfers." David shook his head in disbelief. "That's not it, Ryan. I saw everything. You transferred millions of dollars to offshore accounts and worked with our competitors. This is not a misunderstanding. You plan to take over this company." But Ryan's voice grew colder. "If you think I don't have a reason, you're wrong." David felt his heart pounding. "Your reason is jealousy. You never considered me. We built this company together, but you decided to betray me because of greed." Ryan replied with exasperation, "It's not jealousy. I just feel like I deserve more. You've always kept me in the dark, always let me work behind the scenes without ever acknowledging my contributions." David was furious. "You think this explains stealing millions of dollars and destroying everything we've done? I was willing to discuss restructuring or more recognition, but you chose betrayal over conversation." Ryan looked down, frustration clear on his face. "I can't take it anymore. This is my way of leaving and getting my money back." David stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "No, Ryan. You're not getting anything. You think you can keep playing this game, but I've prepared everything in advance." Ryan's eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" David asked, his tone serious. "I've spoken to the legal team. Your accounts have been frozen. You can't access any more of the money you've been withdrawing." For the first time, real fear flashed across Ryan's face. He stood up abruptly, his voice rising in panic. "You can't do this. This is my only chance. I've been planning this for a long time." David remained calm, his voice steady. "It's over, Ryan. You've been found out. There's no way out. You've betrayed both me and the company." Ryan's face twisted in anger. "You think you've won, don't you? You think freezing my accounts is enough? I have connections, David. You don't know who you're up against." David looked him straight in the eye, unflinching. "I understand perfectly what I'm dealing with, and I'm not afraid of you, or the connections you pride yourself on." Ryan took a step back, his confidence fading as reality set in. He was trapped, and he realized that years of meticulous planning to take over the company were unraveling before his eyes. "You're going to regret this," Ryan muttered, his voice thick with malice. "You're going to regret confronting me." David was unfazed. "I regret trusting you. I regret ever considering you a friend with that." Ryan stormed off, leaving David standing alone in the empty office. The weight of the confrontation weighed heavily on him, but there was also a sense of relief that he had taken the first step toward protecting his company and legacy, even if the cost was high. David sat down at his desk, his head in his hands, a stab of betrayal in his gut. But there was no time for self-pity. He had to focus on moving forward, rebuilding what Ryan had tried to destroy. As he was thinking, the door opened slightly and Emily walked into the room. She had been waiting outside, sensing something important was happening. "David," she asked softly. David looked up, his face tired but determined. "It's over, Ryan's gone." Emily hesitantly sat down across from him. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of sympathy. David nodded slowly. "I should have seen it coming. I trusted you, and you betrayed me." Emily placed a hand lightly on his arm. "You did the right thing, David. You stopped him before it was too late." David took a deep breath, trying to relax the weight on his chest. "Thank you, Emily," she smiled softly. "I'm just glad I could help." The next morning, David sat at his desk, still absorbing the events of the day before. Ryan was gone, his betrayal exposed, and his plan to take over the company was falling apart. The pressure seemed to have given way to a new ray of hope. But the aftermath of everything was still heavy, the wounds more painful than he had ever thought. As he looked out the window at the city skyline, David's mind kept returning to a single thought: Emily. The young waitress had bravely revealed the truth. If it weren't for her, David might have signed the contract and inadvertently handed the company over to Ryan. He knew he couldn't move forward without acknowledging Emily's contribution. He picked up the phone and called the coffee shop where Emily worked. When the manager replied that Emily was not on duty that day, David decided to visit her later that afternoon. He drove to the modest neighborhood where Emily lived, a far cry from the luxury he was used to. The small houses lined up neatly, the narrow streets, and the old cars created a simple but warm scene. David parked the car and walked up to the old house where Emily and her mother lived. He took a deep breath before knocking on the door, feeling a strange sense of nervousness. The door opened and Emily stood in the doorway, surprised to see David. "Mr. Sullivan, what's the matter?" David smiled gently. "I came to thank you from the bottom of my heart." Emily opened the door again, inviting him in. Stepping inside, David found the space simple but cozy. It was clear that Emily and her mother lived on limited means. They sat on the old sofa in the small living room. "I've thought a lot about what happened," David began, his voice sincere. "If it weren't for you, I would have lost everything. You didn't have to intervene, but you did, and it meant a lot to me." Emily felt embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would do." David shook his head. "Not everyone is as brave as you. You took a risk and saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." She blushed but remained modest. "I just did what I thought was right." David smiled gratefully. "I want to repay that. From our conversations, I know you had to give up your studies to take care of your mother. I want to help you finish your studies, if you are still interested, and if you want. I also want to invite you to join my company. You have shown good instincts and I need someone like you on my team." Emily was surprised and touched. "You want to help me go back to school?" David nodded. "I know you are passionate about economics, and you have a lot of potential. Take advantage of this opportunity and develop it." She didn't know what else to say, except "Thank you. This is the most important thing to me." David gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. Just take advantage of this opportunity. I believe in you." Emily nodded, still moved. "I promise to do well." David stood up, feeling relieved that he had repaid Emily. "My team will contact you about the details, but for now take care of your mother and think about what you want to do next." Emily smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." David would never forget this moment. He gave Emily one last bow before stepping out into the cool evening air. As he walked back to his car, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. For the first time since Ryan's betrayal, he felt like he was truly moving forward. Emily's courage had changed everything for him, and now he had given her the chance to change his own life. It wasn't just about repaying a debt, it was about helping someone who had helped him when he needed it most. More than anything, it brought David a deep sense of peace. The days that followed David's visit to Emily's house were eventful and changing for both of them. Emily spent much of her time thinking about the opportunity David had presented. The dream of going back to school had always been a distant dream since she had stopped studying to care for her mother. Now that dream suddenly seemed possible, and the possibility of working for David's company seemed like an opportunity she had never imagined. Though she was excited, Emily was also hesitant. She was used to keeping quiet and not attracting attention, always the one who quietly helped others without expecting anything in return. Now being given the opportunity to step into a new world was both exciting and terrifying. Meanwhile, David had been conferring with his team, making sure that everything was ready for Emily to start working at the company when she was ready. He wanted to give her time to think about her decision, knowing that it was not something that could be rushed. However, he was confident that she would accept. He saw the fire of ambition in her eyes and knew that she was capable of great things. A week later, Emily made her decision. David was sitting in his office going over some papers when his assistant called in. "Mr. Sullivan, Emily Adams is here to see you." David felt a surge of excitement. He had been waiting to hear from her. The door opened and Emily walked in, looking nervous but determined. "David," she said, sitting down and clasping her hands in her lap. "I've thought a lot about your offer, and I've decided to accept. Both the opportunity to go back to school and the position at your company are very appealing." David's smile grew brighter. "I'm glad to hear that. I know you'll make the right decision." Emily breathed a sigh of relief, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It's a little overwhelming," she admitted. "I never thought I'd be in this position." David nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know it's a big step, but you've proven yourself capable of it. With your background in economics, you will bring a fresh perspective to the team." Emily smiled gratefully. "Thank you, David. I really appreciate this opportunity." David leaned forward, his eyes serious but encouraging. "This is not just about paying off debt, but also about recognizing your true potential. I believe that with the right support, you will thrive here." Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. She had always been a hard worker, but no one had ever believed in her abilities like this before. David's confidence gave her the strength to overcome her doubts. "I will not disappoint you," she said with determination in her voice. David smiled with satisfaction. "I have no doubt about that. We will start with the school registration procedures, and in the meantime, we can begin integrating you into the company. You'll be assigned a mentor to help you get settled in, and I'll be here to support you whenever you need it." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. She was entering a new chapter of her life, one filled with limitless possibilities. The fear was still there, but there was also excitement. When they finished discussing the details of her new role and her education plan, Emily stood up to leave. She felt relieved, as if a great burden had been lifted. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream again. As she walked out of the office, Emily turned to look at David. "Thank you, David, for everything." David smiled kindly. "You deserve this, Emily. Welcome to the team." Over the next few weeks, Emily began her new journey. The transition from waitress to corporate employee was challenging at first, but the supportive environment of David's company, along with the dedicated help of her mentor Sandra, helped her adapt quickly. Although Emily initially struggled with the new challenges, she grew more confident with each passing day, applying her economics background to her work and impressing her colleagues with her insights. David continued to monitor her progress, feeling pleased to see her thrive, and realized that he had made the right decision to give Emily a chance. Emily always felt like she had to work hard to prove her worth in a competitive corporate environment. One day, her close colleague Sandra gently said, "You don't have to prove anything, Emily. You've shown yourself worthy of being here. The work you've done so far has been excellent." Sandra's words of encouragement gave Emily a newfound strength. She had spent much of her life doubting herself, always feeling like she was behind everyone else, but now, for the first time, she felt like an equal and capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. Although the corporate world was still a far cry from her old life as a waitress, Emily had found her place. With a strong economic background, she saw things from a unique perspective and often brought ideas that others had never thought of. David, the company's director, gradually began to trust her insights in strategy meetings, frequently asking her for her opinion on important decisions and listening to her suggestions sincerely. One day, David called Emily into his office for a private meeting. She walked in with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Although they had built a comfortable working relationship, Emily still felt a sense of awe for David, who had given her a second chance and trusted her to grow within the company. David relaxed in his chair, gesturing for her to sit down. "I've been reviewing your work over the past few weeks, and I have to say, I'm impressed." Emily's heart raced. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I always try my best." David smiled. "You've gone above and beyond. You've brought a fresh perspective to the team, and your ability to identify problems before they become problems has helped us many times. You truly have a special talent." Emily was overwhelmed with gratitude at the compliment. "I've been thinking about how we can expand your role here. You've proven yourself capable of taking on more responsibility, and I'd like you to take on a leadership role on a new project." Emily was taken aback by the offer. "A leadership role?" she asked. David nodded. "Yes. I want you to lead our international expansion project. You'll work directly with me to develop strategy, analyze finances, and oversee implementation. It's a big step, but I think you're ready." Although she had only been with the company for a short time, Emily felt both nervous and excited about the opportunity. She accepted the assignment with determination, and in the following days, she devoted herself to preparing for the new project. Together with David and Sandra, Emily collected data, analyzed market trends, and developed a comprehensive strategy. The project not only expands the company's horizons but also puts Emily in challenging situations, from adjusting to local regulations to understanding business cultures in other countries. While the project is going well, an unexpected incident occurs. Ryan, their former colleague and now traitor, suddenly reappears. One morning, David receives a sealed envelope with his name on it. Inside is a USB containing a video recording of Ryan's threats. In the video, Ryan claims that he has never been defeated and has a lot of information to bring down the company as well as everything that David and Emily have built. Ryan's appearance not only threatens the expansion project but also poses a great risk to the future of the company. Emily and David must quickly face this threat. Together, they find a way to handle the situation, from increasing information security to cooperating with legal experts to stop Ryan's evil plans. During this process, the relationship between Emily and David became stronger. They learned to trust and support each other in the most difficult times. The expansion project was not only a business challenge but also a lesson in perseverance, solidarity, and the ability to overcome difficulties of the whole team. Thanks to Emily's leadership and David's dedicated support, they overcame the challenges caused by Ryan. The expansion project was a great success, bringing in significant profits and affirming the company's position in the international market. Emily not only proved her ability but also affirmed the value of trust and solidarity in the working environment. One dark night, David sat alone in his office, his eyes wearily scanning the hundreds of reports from Julian's team. Suddenly, the phone on his desk rang loudly. It was Julian calling. "We've discovered something important," Julian said in a serious but calm voice. Ryan made a serious mistake. David sat up straight, his heart pounding as if it was about to escape. "Can you explain?" "A member of our team intercepted a text message Ryan sent to a reputable reporter. He was trying to sell a story about you, but it was all lies. Ryan mixed truths and half-truths, creating a vague picture, and he seemed to be in a hurry to get the story out before someone found out." David felt a wave of mixed emotions, both relief and anger. So Ryan's evidence is not credible. This is a clear campaign of slander. He is trying to destroy my reputation through lies. "What is Ryan's story?" David asked with some concern. "He peddles about your financial misconduct, accusing you of engaging in illegal transactions with offshore companies and using offshore accounts to hide profits. It's all an illusion, but Ryan tries to make it look believable." David sighed, feeling the tension begin to ease. "Can we stop him?" "We've already started. Julian has contacted the media outlets Ryan is targeting, and we are preparing a fact-based story to publish. When we present the truth about Ryan's betrayal, the stolen funds and the offshore accounts he used, everything will become clear and discredit everything Ryan says about you." David nodded, feeling relieved. "What about Ryan? Can we stop him from continuing?" "That's good news," Julian replied. "We've gathered enough evidence to sue Ryan for defamation, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Your legal team is ready to act. Ryan has no choice." David leaned back in his chair, the tension from the long days starting to melt away. "So we can end this," he said. "We'll finish Ryan off, legally and publicly." Julian confirmed. "Yes, Ryan won't be able to hide behind his lies anymore." The call ended and David sat in silence, letting the relief wash over him. Ryan had come at him with all his might, but in the end his lies had been exposed. David had weathered the storm, and now the future was starting to shine brightly ahead. The next morning, David was determined not to let Ryan off the hook. News spread quickly when David's legal team released a formal statement to the media, revealing Ryan's misdeeds, including financial abuse, theft, and attempts to tarnish David's reputation. The news outlets rushed to cover the story, and within hours, Ryan's name was the focus of a major corporate scandal. From his high-rise office, David watched the events unfold, satisfied that justice had been served. Ryan had tried to ruin his reputation, but now the truth was out, and Ryan would face the consequences of his actions. Suddenly there was a soft knock on the door. Emily entered the office, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "I saw the news," she said softly. "It seems like everything has finally come out." David nodded, his eyes still on the news. "It's over, at least the worst part. Ryan will be held accountable for what he did." Emily moved closer, standing by his desk. "You've been through a lot these past few months. I'm glad you've made it through." David raised his head, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you, Emily. You've been there for me the whole time." Emily smiled, her eyes soft. "I'm just glad I could help." The two stood in silence for a moment, the heavy emotions of the past months slowly fading away. The threats from Ryan had dissipated, and David could focus on the future. Looking at Emily, he realized that the future wasn't just about business. "You've become more than just an assistant," David said, his voice softer. "You've become someone I can trust and rely on." Emily's face softened and she nodded slightly. "I feel the same way." David smiled, the warmth he'd been missing returning. "I think we're a great team." Emily chuckled. "I think so." The pressure of the past weeks slowly melted away, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Ryan had tried to tear them apart, but instead it had only strengthened the bond between them. David stood up, holding out his hand to Emily. "Let's get back to work. There's a lot to do." Emily took his hand, smiling brightly. Together they walked out of the office, ready to face the challenges ahead. With Ryan's fall behind them, the company began to return to normal. The media moved on to the next story, and the legal battles against Ryan continued. David felt a pride he had never imagined. The storm had passed in a few weeks, and now he could focus on what really mattered: the future of the company and the people who had been with him through it all.